Hello and welcome to the Geolog 7 Next Generation Formation Evaluation presentation. I'm going to spend about half an hour and focus on the latest release of the Geolog product suite, and that's Geolog 7. It came out in the summer this year, and it really was a very critical release for Paradigm. It encompassed a whole raft of new technology, all wrapped up in a beautiful new intuitive interface, and we're going to focus on that, as I say, over the next half an hour. So let's take a look then at the agenda for this small presentation. We're going to look at what Geolog is. I realise there may be one or two people who are not actually familiar with the product suite, and in that case this will give you just a very brief overview. We'll then focus on, as I said, the Geolog 7 release, and we're going to look at what makes this one such a special release and such an important release for Paradigm. We've then got a live demonstration. I'm going to focus on the software. I'm going to try and run that for the majority of the presentation. I don't want to bore you too much with PowerPoint slides. Ultimately, there's going to be things that I won't have time to cover in the presentation because, as I said, it's a very big release and there's a lot of new toys to play with in there. So we're going to focus just a little bit of time on some of the new functionality that I won't have time to cover before we finally wrap everything up in a conclusion. So what is Geolog? Well, Geolog's been around now in the industry around 30 years, and as you can see, we've got three basic areas that we focus on. Originally, it was essentially a petrophysics tool, so whether you were working with the basic deterministic analysis or you were going through a full optimizing solution, a probabilistic solution, you had a very powerful petrophysical tool there, and this broadened over the years to encompass all of the new tools, nuclear magnetic resonance, full waveform sonic, as well as special core analysis and so on. So a very, very strong petrophysical background with very good links with industry. Then over the years we've moved into the areas of geophysics, so whether it's doing fluid substitution, pore pressure prediction, or maybe working with some AVO work, we have a suite of borehole geophysical tools that sit alongside there, again in the same application, using the same interface and sitting alongside the petrophysics. And then more recently we've really tried to branch out towards the geology side of things, so whether it's working in well correlation or whether you're working with borehole image tools, we have a whole range of tools in there to focus specifically on that area. So a very broad spectrum, if you like, working with log-based data. And Geolog is very much a comprehensive package when it comes to that. But as I said, the focus of the presentation is essentially Geolog 7. So what makes Geolog 7 so special? Well, the first thing that if you're a Geolog user you're going to notice is we have a brand new interface. Geolog is now programmed inside the Qt programming environment, and that gives us access to a whole range of new graphic libraries and a lot of functionality that just simply wasn't possible in the earlier version of Geolog. So Geolog 7, a brand new interface, very similar look and feel now to the rest of the Paradigm suite. So some of the icons you're going to recognize, some of the motif of the mouse you're going to recognize, and the interface, the way that the desktop is organized. So that's nice. It gives you a continuity between not only Geolog but also between the rest of the Paradigm suite. But also you're going to find it's a lot more ergonomic. It's a lot more intuitive, a lot more easy to use. And if you're maybe a more casual user, hopefully you're going to find that it's a lot easier to pick up if you've not been working with the product for maybe a few weeks. A lot of the everyday tasks like data loading, for example, are now a lot easier and a lot faster. A lot of the workflows are far more tightly integrated, so if you're putting a more workflow-orientated project together, hopefully you're going to find tools in there to really speed things up and, as I said, tighten up the integration. And as well, of course, as the new functionality, we've got a whole range of improved existing functionality. So a very nice mix of what was already in Geolog being improved, but also bringing in some additional functionality, and we'll focus on that when we get to the live demonstration. So a live demo then, I chose for this particular presentation, I'd like to do a demo that's going to be workflow orientated. So we're going to take some basic data files and we're going to load them, and I'm going to show you how easy it is now to get data into Geolog. It was always quite straightforward getting data into Geolog. The Connect application as it was a very nice utility. We'd like to think we've made it even easier with Geolog 7. So we're going to get some data into Geolog. We're then going to do some very simple visualizing and some editing of the data. And then we're going to work through a simple deterministic analysis, and we're going to go through 2 or 3 steps within that analysis, and I'm going to show you some of the new capabilities inside there. we've got a brand new area that focuses specifically on special core analysis and in particular saturation height modeling. So I'm going to focus as part of this interpretation on the use of special core analysis data and in particular capillary pressure data and the calculation of saturation height functions before we finally take our new well that we've loaded and we're going to correlate it with some nearby wells. So that's my live demonstration. Hopefully I'm going to get through that more or less in the time that's allotted to me. So let's just put PowerPoint away for a moment. And here is the new interface. This is Geolog 7. This is the project module as it was. If I just move that out of the way, you'll see that we've actually down to only 5 buttons on the menu now. You'll notice that the connect button is now no longer there, and as we're going to see, all of the connect functionality now sits inside the project module, which to me is probably the more logical place to put it, as the project is the project management utility. So no connect button. And the interface, as I said, it's been totally redeveloped from the ground up. We have basically a central working area. Now, the central working area can be split and divided any number of times. You can go on and split these into increasingly smaller amounts, depending on how many workspaces or tabbed workspaces you want. Each of those individual tabbed workspaces can also be separated off from the main body of the application. So if you need to open up, let's for example say a catalog on one of these tabs, you can open up the catalog and you can move it over onto your other screen and have it there as a reference should you need to. At any time you can then simply redock that back with the main interface, or if you wanted to, you can delete any of those tabs and move them away. So slightly less disorganized as the messy desktop that we had in the previous release, a little bit more organized, a little bit more constrained, but I think a much nicer way of working, being able to utilize these tabbed dialog boxes. Then around the outside of the tab working area are all of the basic menus and the options that you had. The difference being now, of course, is that you can pick them up and you can drag them around on the screen and you can organize them in any way that you want. You can have them detached, so if you have a menu, for example, that you like to reference back to at any time, you can have that separated off onto a different screen, or you can simply remove certain menus if you feel that they're no longer suitable and you're not going to be needing them as part of interpretation. At any time, you can always go back and restore your display back to the default, and that'll take it back to how it was when it came out of the box, so to speak. So I mentioned right at the beginning then that the connect button is no longer there. Where is connect? Well, connect is now, as I said, inside the project module, and we've got a number of ways of getting data into Geolog. The old connect is now being rebranded as the standard file importer. So if I want to search for a file that's on the network, I can open up the file importer, find that file, and Geolog will scan it and load it as it did in the previous versions. But there's a lot more options now. One of the nice ones is simply being able to drag and drop files from your desktop, or indeed a folder somewhere on the desktop, directly onto the Geolog desktop. So if I drag on, for example, that Geolog ASCII file, it's got a large amount of data in it. It immediately recognizes the file format. It opens up the file in the correct loading utility, which in this case is the file importer. And the nice thing here is I can load multiple files in this way, so I don't have to just pick up a single file at a time. I can pick up multiple dlist files, or indeed I could pick up a range of different file formats, multiple dlist, las, and lis in a combination. Geolog will very quickly sort through those files, work out what each one is, and open up the necessary loader. So a very easy way of getting data into Geolog, and also focusing on that multiple data loading, which perhaps was a little awkward in the earlier versions. If you're pulling data onto the desktop, of course, it doesn't matter what kind of file it is. Geolog will recognize it. Here's a core image. I drag it directly onto the desktop. Geolog recognizes that it's a core image file. It simply opens it up in an artist display. Here's a text file with some tops information. If I drag that one onto the desktop, Geolog simply opens it up in a text editor, because it knows it's a text file. This one came out of Excel. It's got some tops information. Now it's opened it up in a text editor, which means I can physically edit the data within here. I can go in and make some changes. Or alternatively, I can send it straight to the text importer. In the early versions of Geolog, we had what was called the flat ASCII format. The flat ASCII format no longer exists. We now have this custom text importer, and it's a lot easier to use. It's a lot more intuitive. It has a lot of similarities with Excel. The first of these two tabs, for example, allows you to pass through the data, choosing the various delimiters that you want to use, whether it's a fixed width for each individual column, or you want to use a specific delimiter like commas. You can define that. And then simply you can tell it exactly which of the inputs you want to use. Now it can work out the inputs for you simply by being told how many header rows it has. In this case, mine has 2 header rows, and I can ask it to determine the log names directly from those headers. Or alternatively, I can come in and indicate what cell I wish to identify, highlight the cell, and then specify the name. In this case, as I said, it's some TOPS information, so I'm going to send it directly into a TOPS set, and I'm going to send it with TOPS interpolation, and then I'm going to import it, and that's the data gone directly in. This one had the well name included in the text file. If the well name was not included, it would simply prompt me to find out what that file name was. So a drag and drop, very nice way of getting data in, very intuitive, very, very easy to use. We also have a file catalog here, which allows you to browse through folders, and if you wanted to pick multiple files to load, for example, then this would be a great way of doing it. So if I opened up this project, for example, in here I can see a list of all of the files. I can simply highlight a particular file that I want to look at. I can use a little browsing window on the right hand side, which allows me to get an overview of what's included in there, and I can obviously highlight multiple files if I wish. Highlight the multiple files and then tell it to load them directly into the database. So again, another nice little utility for getting multiple data files directly into Geolog. So we've loaded our data. Let's put project to one side, and let's open up that file that we've just loaded. It, as I said, it was a well file. It had some scal data included in it. Also had some image data included in it. So let's open it up. There it is, it's the Deneb well, and I'm going to open up a layout for this particular data. And so here we go. So we've got some basic data, some standard wireline logs, also some image data. Now, one of the nice things with the new interface with the Qt environment is it's given us a lot of the flexibility that we really wanted to have with regards to the motif of the mouse. And by that I mean simply having access to functions directly off the right mouse button. So the right mouse button now, wherever you are, will give access to a lot of functionality that previously you might have had to go through the menu for. So for example, in here we can see that my density curve is actually off depth. We have a constant depth shift there with my neutron. Previous versions of Geolog, I'd need to set up a template in a very specific way in order to perform a depth matching function. In this version, we've tried to make it as easy as possible simply by highlighting the log that you want, right-clicking and telling you want to perform a depth shift, and assuming you want to send the data to the same set, you can define that, but essentially it's just a question of clicking and dragging, and I can do that very quickly just using the left mouse button to click and drag. And I can do stretch and squeeze shifts. I can maybe do a block shift. I can do 0 shifts above and below, and then just stretch and squeeze maybe the area in between if that's what I want to do. As I said, a bulk shift simply by highlighting the bulk shift option. So a lot easier then than the previous version for depth shifting. Simply right click on whatever log it is that you want to shift and perform the shifts. And then you can apply that shift to one log, or you can apply it to multiple logs. But it doesn't end with just simple logs like a density curve, for example. Let's say I've got some FMI data and I wanted to depth shift that, or maybe I had some other array format data. Again, it's exactly the same principle. Right click, depth shift the log. This one will take just a little bit longer because there's obviously a lot more data, but then it's the same principle. Click and drag, click and drag. So if I've got core data included in here and I've got my image logs and I'm trying to depth match everything, get everything lined up, being able to do this very, very quickly and easily makes the editing of the data a lot faster inside Geolog 7. Finally, I notice I don't have a bit size in this particular well, so I'm just going to run a quick evaluate statement to create the bit size. Now, The evaluate statement's a very powerful little maths utility, and it was great for creating new data or manipulating data using a variety of functions, but quite often people would be unaware of either the syntax that you had to use or indeed the kind of functions that were available inside both the evaluate statement and the logland programming utility. And so now we have a little ellipsis button, so if you don't know the syntax or you don't know the function that you want to use, that will give you access to what's called the expression builder, and you can come in here and you can query the various functions that you have, the syntax on how to apply that function, and hopefully be able to give you a lot more control and a lot more power at your fingertips from how you can utilize this application. As I say, I don't want to do anything complex. I'm simply going to create a bit size curve in this particular well. So let me do that. Okay, so there we go. That gives me a bit size in my well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save my well, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to go and perform a very basic deterministic interpretation. So I'm going to close that layout, and I'm going to open up a workspace which I've got predefined for a deterministic interpretation. So you can see here in the workspace I have a layout which has got already some tracks defined for the various volumes and percentages. I've also got a frequency plot here. One of the things I'd like to do maybe before I start my interpretation is trim down this menu system here on the right hand side. I've told you how we can obviously pick menus up and we can drag them about on the screen, but what happens if I want to create my own custom menu? Previous releases of Geolog certainly allowed you to customize the menu systems, but it was a little complex. You had to know how to manipulate the text files that sit behind there. In the new version, again, we've tried to streamline the procedure. We've tried to focus on workflow and give you the tools very, very easily to customize your install. So in this case, I'm going to create simply a new menu. And as part of that new menu, I'm going to pick the various modules that I want to run in this particular workflow. Well, I'm going to calculate shale volume from gamma ray, and I'll just simply drag that over there. I'm going to run a porosity from density, and I'm going to run a water saturation from Archie. And very, very quickly, and I'm just going to right click and save that. I've already got one, so I'm going to rerun that one, resave it as that one. And now I have a menu system that is actually part of my environment. It's connected to my login, so whenever I come in, that menu system is there. The menu system can be docked alongside all the other menus very, very simply. And as I said, it's there waiting for me whenever I log in. So let's utilize that menu then. First thing I'm going to do is just split my desktop here, and I'm going to open up the gamma ray v shale calculation. The first thing I want to do is pick my matrix and shale points. Again, right mouse button in this sort of situation is really, really useful to have. I simply right click, insert the point that I want to do, and I'm going to insert a matrix point. And I'm going to right click and insert a point, and we're going to call this my shale point. Now you'll notice that these points are going directly into the module launcher over there on the right hand side, so that when I come in and I run that, there I go, I get my shale volume directly inside my layout. Now what I can do is I can go and I can open up my density from porosity. Now, I'm not going to go in and I'm going to pick each of these parameters because I simply don't have the time, but I can simply restore a previously run parameter if I wanted to, and rerun that. So I'm going to rerun the porosity from density, and then I've got my saturation from Archie, and again I'll rerun a previous run on that one, and that then should give me a saturation curve for this particular one. So there we go, a very, very basic, fairly crude interpretation, but done very, very quickly as part of this quick deterministic workflow. Obviously, a deterministic workflow is generally an iterative procedure, and quite often you want to go back and adjust the parameters and play around with the values included in that interpretation. That was possible to do in early versions of Geolog, but it was necessary to reopen each module each time, perhaps restore the parameters from the previous run, make some changes, and then rerun it. Now in the new version, you'll notice that we can have all of the modules open at the same time. And in the bottom half of the screen here, you'll see we've got a little tick box that says auto run, and simply auto run basically says that if any of the parameters relating to this particular module change, if any of the inputs change, rerun that module, and you can choose to switch it on or off depending on which particular modules you want to rerun. So I'm going to rerun the V-shell from gamma ray, but of course the porosity and the saturation are all already highlighted, and if my paste summary module was obviously working, then I could go in and run that one as well. So event, any module that you happen to have open will automatically rerun, such that if I come in here and I change and make a radical change to my matrix value, what you'll see now is that the V-shell calculation is rerun, the porosity calculation is rerun, and the saturation calculation. So a very nice way of getting the sensitivities on the various parameters that are going into your interpretation, and also a nice way of speeding up the whole deterministic procedure. Okay, let's save my well. Let's close down some of these windows. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to integrate now the special core analysis data that came with this well. I mentioned before that we have a new text importer, and the text importer came really hand in hand with this new core analysis package, because we needed to have a way of getting special core analysis data very easily into Geolog. And so the core loader is very similar to that standard ASCII loader that I showed you earlier on. Of course, the ability to be able to copy and paste directly from Excel is vital. So here I can simply copy the information out of that Excel spreadsheet. So each time a report comes from a particular lab, I can then paste it directly into my template and simply load that SCAL data into the well. So it makes data loading very easy. It's a very intuitive way of getting that data inside Geolog. But once it's all loaded, we've then got 3 separate workflows. One for the core corrections, so a range of corrections to apply to the core data. We then go through a model building stage, and then we go through the actual saturation and height above free water level modeling. So let's take a look then at each of those stages. Let's have a look at the core corrections. The core corrections basically are 3 correction types that are applied to the data. First of all, we double check to make sure that the inputs are correct, and then we take a look at the individual cap curves in this case. So here you can see we've got a range of cap curves. The fluid system is defined in here, and I can highlight multiple or individual samples as required, and they are highlighted down in the bottom half of the screen. I can play around with the axes very, very quickly. If I need to change the scales on those axes, then I can do it. It's all handled that automatically simply by typing in those values. Once I know that I've got my data, I can then go ahead and perform the corrections. And there's 3 corrections to apply: a closure correction, a clay-bound water correction, and a stress correction. The closure correction, the first one on here, really applies to mercury injection data. What we're trying to do is reduce the wetting phase saturation down to 1. And we can look at that in sample 17 here. You can see that you have this sort of shoulder, if you like, right down at the bottom of the sample. And really what we need to do is be able to pick a point where we start to get invasion into the formation, where we start to get that 100% wetting phase saturation. So by interactively dragging that slider on the right hand side, I can pick where I feel that entry pressure point lies for that particular sample, and I can do that for each individual sample, and depending on the sample I can obviously work around with the scales to zoom in and get exactly the right display. Once you've performed all those closure corrections, as I said, you can see the value of the correction applied to the data on the right hand side, and if I know the value, obviously I could type it in there, but it's a little easier to pick it directly off the plot. I can then move on to the clay-bound water correction. Now here obviously we're reliant on you being able to load the correct QV data, so you've got the various CEC information contained in the well, and if you have that necessary information and information regarding the salinity, you can apply that correction automatically. There's nothing interactive about that clay-bound water correction. Simply it will be applied assuming you have loaded the correct data into the well. Similarly for the stress correction, assuming you have the various reservoir as well as laboratory porosities and permeabilities, you can apply that stress correction directly to the data. And for each of these corrections, you'll notice that you get a ghosted curve to show you how much of a correction has been applied. And I can choose to turn that correction on or off for a particular sample, or I can choose to turn the sample on or off if I feel that it's not suitable for to take place in the rest of the analysis. Then finally, the last tab gives you an overview of all of the corrections that have been applied, along with, as I said, the ghosted curve to show you how that sample is moving effectively up and to the right. Again, I can highlight multiple samples, again, if I want to see, and then maybe switch a particular sample off if I feel it's not suitable. But once I'm happy with the corrections, the output corrected logs button will simply send those new corrected curves directly into the database, directly into the well. Once you've done your corrections, it's time to create a model. Create a model for the saturation and the height above free water level modeling. So let me open up the modeling window. So here we go. We can see we've got a number of tabs working left to right. And the first thing you'll notice is that we've got a range of curve fit equations that come as part of the install. A lot of these you're probably familiar with, things like lambda and Leverett J. Some of the more complex curve fit equations like Tamiya and Brooks-Corey are also included. So you can choose which equation you want to use. You can modify these equations. The actual saturation equation is included down there at the bottom. Or alternatively, you can simply add your own. So if you know, or you have a modified version of one of these that you want to work with, or you have your own saturation curve fit equations that you want to use, they can very simply be added in. The expression builder is available directly off the saturation equation line, so you can put that information directly into the core modeling phase. All of the saturation equations have a variety of parameters. The parameters are displayed down in the bottom half of the screen, together with some initial values and some boundaries. Obviously, when the curve fitting is taking place, certain values need to be constrained within certain bounds, and so you can define those prior to doing the curve fitting. But once you've got your saturation equations that you're going to use, you can go through and check some basic parameters, so checking some units. You also got the option to include a z-axis curve in here. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to be solving saturation as a function of height above free water level and a third axis. So we're going to be utilizing or extrapolating along a third axis as part of the model building phase. And that third axis, as quite often, is something like permeability or porosity, but equally it could be maybe V-shale if you feel that's a suitable curve to use and a good indicator of permeability. So the z-axis is included there in the options tab. You also have the option of working with different fluid systems. So if you have a range of samples that come from different fluid systems and you want to transpose between one fluid system and another to bring everything together, then you can define those, assuming you have the correct parameters with regards to contact angle, interfacial tension, and so on. So the variety of fluid systems are handled on the Fluids tab. And then it's a question of taking a look at the cap curves in 3D, and in this case plotted alongside that z-axis curve, which in this case was permeability. So here we've got saturation versus pressure versus permeability. And what you're looking for here is really the ability to be able to fit a plane directly through each of those samples, because now we're not looking just to simply curve fit one capillary pressure curve. We're looking to be able to model all of those capillary pressure curves so that we can come up with a modeling algorithm that's suitable for all of this data. So assuming we think we can do a reasonably good job of fitting a plane through that data, we can then go through and take a look at how each of the individual cap curves can be fitted. So this is just simply a nonlinear curve fit directly through each of those capillary pressure curves, and you can see the equation together with the amount of error associated with the fit for each of those. And in the top half of the screen, you also get some information about the initial parameters for each of the curve fit equations, together with the resulting curve fit parameters once the capillary pressure curves have been fit. And it gives you a good indication of whether it can solve the particular fitting algorithm. Once you're happy with the curve fit for each of those capillary pressure curves, it's time to take a look at how we can extrapolate that across the z-axis and come up with a model that's suitable for all of the data. And this provides us with a range of tools for looking at all this information. We've got 5 different fitting algorithms here for working, in this case, alongside the permeability curve. Linear, power, exponential, logarithmic, and so on. And you can toggle between those various curve fitting algorithms very simply by using these hotbars that occur on each of the cross plots. You also have the option of working using these little solvers that Geolog provides. So if I select the best regressions, in this case for EQR, or indeed the lambda, find best regressions, and you notice here now it chooses, okay, it's picked an exponential fit for that particular set of parameters. It gives us a global error, it gives us a parameter error. It then allows us to create a model utilizing those set of curve fit algorithms. So if I select create model, what that does is it allows me to take a look then at how that plane fits through those capillary pressure curves. And you can see it's done a reasonably good job. But if I wanted to compare that to maybe to one of the other curve fitting algorithms, because as I said we have a number of different options in here, then I can simply go back to the model builder. I could maybe select the Leverett J, or I could select the Brooks-Curry. I could say find the best regressions again, and then create the model. And now it allows me to compare one against the other. So here is my second curve fitting set of parameters, and here's my my lambda. So lambda versus the Brooks-Curry. So hopefully you've seen we've got a very nice interactive set of tools for working with the scal data to enable us to be able to come up with a very robust saturation curve fit equation. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use that that equation to calculate saturation as a function of height above free water level for a number of other wells that I'm going to bring in. So let me do that. Let's close some of these windows down, and I'll bring in a previous model. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up some additional curves, because obviously I'm interested in working not just with the Deneb well, but also with some additional wells nearby, because I want to go ahead and calculate free water level in those wells. I'm going to work just with a couple of zones as well. I don't have time to go through and work with all of the zones that are included. First thing I can do is I can see how my model versus my log-derived saturations compare, and you can see that in this case not a bad correlation between the two. But for the predicted SW tab right at the end there, this allows me to display basically my log-derived saturations and compare it to my predicted saturations. Let me just switch off that well, because that well in this particular case is not going to be used as part of the interpretation. So here I've got the 3 wells, and I'm going to use the same algorithm that I derived through the capillary pressure curves from that first Deneb well, and to utilize that in order to define the free water level and the saturations in these wells. Now I can go in and I can manually pick where I feel that free water level is if I have a good feeling for it. Alternatively, I can type a value in here into the spreadsheet up in the top half of the screen, or I can use the solver, and the solver will allow me to pick the free water level based on the fit from the model and the saturation curves. And very quickly you can see it's done a reasonably good job there. And I could come in if I wanted to, if I had multiple zones, and I could define maybe a higher zone or indeed a third or a fourth. But the solver really does give me a very good first guess of where it feels that free water level is. If I need to perhaps go in and adjust that slightly, then I can do that and rerun the solver. So very quickly we've integrated my special core analysis data, and I think we've done a pretty good job of bringing that in with the other wells in the field. Let's put it to one side, because I realize I'm running out of time, and I want to take a very quick look before we finish at the new section module. So this is the new section module, and like most of Geolog, section has had a complete rewrite as part of this Geolog 7 release. If I open up a workspace, hopefully that'll give you some idea of what the new section looks like. It's a range of windows now, rather than just simply having one cross-section window. And let me just zoom in here. and take a little look at the cross-section display. So in the top half of the screen on the left here, you can see we have the cross-section display, and this is similar to what we had in the earlier versions of Geolog. Main differences being that the layouts are now dynamic, so you can go in and edit the layouts directly on the screen, something that you couldn't do in earlier versions of Geolog. You can add logs onto it, you can stretch and squeeze the displays, you can put the fill patterns on, and so on. That cross-section window is now dynamically linked with the base map that is over here on the right-hand side. What we've done is we've allowed you to do some basic interpretation in here, so I can still put faults directly in here between wells, so I can do some interpretation. I can maybe pinch out these zones if I want to make some changes to those particular top boundaries. But we've taken all of the correlation functionality out of this cross-section window, and we've placed it where we feel it belongs most, or it was most suitable, which is in a correlation panel, and that's what's down here in the bottom half of the screen. So if I maybe detach the correlation panel just for a moment and open it up, this is the correlation window now, where you would basically do the log correlation rather than doing it in a one-size-fits-all type window, which is effectively what the cross-section window was before. So correlation window, we can move the correlation panel up and down, slide it up and down for all of the wells. Alternatively, we can nudge individual wells just using the little nudge button there at the top of each one. We've got what's called an overview scale, which is quite nice, which allows you to display one particular log, the entire log for the well, together with a little visual window here which shows you how much is being displayed on the screen at any one time, and that allows you to basically go to any point in the well based on the curve characteristics of a particular curve. So the default is the gamma ray, but it could be any curve that you want to use. So that's the overview scale. Obviously, right mouse button functionality is available as it is throughout Geolog. So if I wanted to flatten on a particular horizon, simply right mouse button and flatten. If I wanted to insert a particular pick, I can do that, and the inserting picks allows me to do that at any particular level. So I simply set the hierarchical scheme or the top scheme that I'm working with, choose the level that I want to pick at, and away you go. Alternatively, I can pick up a section of curve and I can utilize that as a guide to where I feel that particular pick is in the nearby well, and I can stretch and I can squeeze that. It's a very much a dynamic object where I can increase the character of the log or reduce the character of the log before I decide where I want to make my pick. And then I can come in and I can select my next marker, and again I can come in and find where I think that is suitable. And you'll notice that as I start to make each of the picks in this well, Geolog knows where all of the various parent-child relationships reside, because it has a strat column that sits behind here, and that strat column contain any number of hierarchical schemes. So I can work with a chronostratigraphic scheme like this one. I could work with a biostratigraphic scheme if that's more suitable. There's a lot of functionality in here, and certainly far too much for me to cover in this short presentation. So I'm going to leave it there. But suffice it to say that the section module, the section window, I feel has had probably one of the biggest revamps in this Geolog 7 release, and I would certainly encourage you to take a look at it. Just to recap then, or refresh, the Geolog 7 release, a very big release for Paradigm. It embodies a brand new interface, a new programming environment that gives us access to a whole range of new features that simply weren't available in the earlier release. But it's a very big release, and I've only managed to scratch the surface as part of this presentation. So just a couple of other little bits and pieces. We've got a fully integrated audit trail as part of the Geolog 7 release. This is something that's been asked for over a number of years. And here we have the ability to basically capture every single thing that happens to a particular well over the course of its life. That means who loaded the various data parts, who edited the various areas. And not only is it sort of a date stamp with regards to that information, but also if you perform any analysis or any interpretation, all of the various parameters are captured as part of that. So very much a very comprehensive audit trail. The borehole interpretation package has had a lot of additional functionality included. The ability to handle partial sinusoids, vertical features, and borehole breakouts is included. And the ability to pick directly on top of an image now rather than in a separate dip track which you then had to overlay. So we've really focused on the usability of the Geomage, the interpretation package, and as I said, really focused on the functionality as well. A range of additional plots comes with it, a walkout plot to accompany the sterionets, which have also had a very nice overview and an improvement in the functionality. Something that's been asked for a long time is a WFT, a formation wireline track, and something that we've wanted to put in for a long time. So now, as a defined, dedicated track type inside any of your layouts, you can now have a wireline formation test track. It allows you to define the various zones, the various fluid types. It allows you to automatically calculate the gradients, calculate the intercepts, and that comes just simply as a new track type as part of the well window, or indeed any of the layouts that you need to prepare. So Geolog 7, I believe, delivers in whatever job that it is that you have at hand, whether you're doing anything basic as data loading and getting data in, or whether you're going through a more advanced interpretation. I think Geolog 7 really does bring Geolog right up to date with all of the latest functionality, as well as probably the most intuitive and easy to use interface in the industry. It's fast, it's highly customizable, it's intuitive and ergonomic, and yet, as with all Geolog releases, it's a very powerful product. It's cross-platform, it's platform independent, so whether you're working standalone on a laptop or whether you're working as part of an integrated product suite, Geolog 7 really is the product that you need. Thanks very much indeed for your time. I hope it's been of interest to you, and myself or any of the Paradigm colleagues would be more than happy to answer any questions, or indeed provide you with any presentations if you'd like to look at it in more detail. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.